A week on from Storm Éowyn, and with still over 100,000 people left without power, there's a growing frustration, some feeling that rural Ireland was abandoned by the government. Also, the government has now appointed both cabinet and junior ministers, with women hugely underrepresented in those numbers. And all of this comes on the back of Sinn Féin TD Pat Daly taking legal action against the government's increase in super junior ministers, or in fact their existence at all. Joining me now to talk about all of this for our Friday forum, Marie Sherlock, Labour TD for Dublin Central. We have the Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin Midwest, Shane Moynihan, and also we are joined by Christina Finn, political editor with the Journal. Good morning and welcome to one and all.
Good morning.
Okay, perception and reality. What about the people who feel abandoned by the government in the wake of the storm? Marie?
Yeah, look, I think, I think while most people would accept that obviously when a storm happens and there's a day or two of terrible inconvenience, the thought that there are people still stuck at home or locked out of their homes because their homes have been so badly damaged, or indeed because of electricity, I think does pose questions now for our level of preparedness. Like, the reality is that there has been an incredible effort by the ESB, by our local authorities, by other public agencies over the past week. But I suppose the reality is that they've been scrambling as well. Like, we've had to have staff coming in.
The lads out there, and they're mostly lads, climbing up the poles and dragging generators up to water treatment plants, they're all doing a great job. It was you lot in Leinster House that let the people down by not having a preparedness.
Yeah, well, look, and I think it's the government, obviously, that have to lead that preparedness. Like, the reality is that, the risk of storms in this country is increasing. Like, as in, the Met Éireann expect that we're going to have, the storms are going to increase in intensity by 20% in terms of storm surges with regards to coastal flooding and, of course, with regards to just heavier precipitation in general. But I suppose my concern now at this stage is that we have a proper coordination in place, much stronger than what we have. Because, like, for instance, the health system is the one that I have engaged with. Like, as in, we have people in decongregated settings, those with intellectual disabilities or indeed physical disabilities, who or in ordinary houses, who have been left completely short. I have 10 individuals living in camp beds over the last week and a half, over the past week, because there's been no forward planning with regards to those health needs in the community. And so, that's a level of detail.
I heard lots of stuff on air, though, about someone who can't power an electric wheelchair, someone who can't generate an oxygen supply or whatever it is. And there's a kind of why aren't the ESB fixing me? Do the ESB even know about you? Do they know you have this problem? How is that to be addressed? Shane?
Well, I think the first thing we have to recognise is that we need to get power and water back to as many people as possible, and that has been the priority of the government over the last week or so. The second thing worth pointing out, which I think has been lost in the commentary a little bit, is that this was a unique weather event. We haven't seen winds of 180 kilometres an hour in Ireland in a long, long time. So I think it's important that we remember that this was a unique weather event. Yes, we now have to start thinking about adaptation and mitigation towards these sort of events in the future, without a doubt. But in terms of the response of government, I think we've seen Minister Darragh Leary leading from the front on this in particular, and the Taoiseach, $250,000 almost has been paid in humanitarian support.
But I'm surprised that, for instance, that there isn't a generator at every Uisce Éireann facility. I'm just surprised at that. They're not that expensive, and there are 8,000 facilities around the country, and you might say, well, you can't really have 8,000 generators. Well, some of them must be so small that the generators would not be expensive to have on standby, and you run them every so often to make sure they're still functioning. I mean, that to me was shocking.
And that is the sort of learning that needs to go right back into the National Emergency Coordination Group on how we prepare for the increased frequency of these events in the future. But I do think it is important to say that we have now stepped up a very strong scaled effort across the country to restore power to people and to restore water to people. That number is coming down at a faster pace.
But when you hear all the stuff about individual hard cases,
for sure,
people who are looking across the road and they see lights on in their neighbour's house, they don't have lights and they need electricity, perhaps for the very basics of cooking and heating.
And I understand that frustration.
They have no fireplace anymore. They can't throw a few logs on the fire. Christina?
Yeah, Pat, I was down in Roscommon when the Taoiseach was down there earlier this week, and I was speaking to some people there in St. Bridget's GAA Club, and they were saying that they have a generator for the floodlights for the pitch, but it's not connected to the clubhouse. So they were saying simple things could be that the generators...
Why does the government have to do that? Why can't they do that? Do you know what I mean?
I think they said that it would cost a good bit of money for every GAA
do we
club.
expect the government to do every single thing for us? I mean, if you've got a particular difficult situation, you're the only one maybe who knows
But
about it.
I don't think it's up
So
to every
therefore
GAA club to be planning for storms that are going to land on our shores. It's up to local authorities and it's up to government to be making these decisions and plans. And yes, I think it has to be said it's unprecedented, but we are being told by the Taoiseach that more severe storms are coming. So preparation is going to be needed. Like on the issue of the generators, a lot of focus was on why the orders weren't put in prior to the storm. We had James Brown, Minister at the Department of Housing, now saying the assessment had to be done after the storm hit to see exactly what we needed. But the understanding is that I think 17 generators were coming from Denmark, Poland. I think a number of them landed during the week. More were meant to be coming from Luxembourg. The request was put in on Saturday. But the department, the member states got back to the Department of Housing and said they needed a bit more information about voltage, the type of generators that were needed. And a response wasn't given by, according to the National Emergency Response, saying that the additional information was given over on Monday. So that's a 2-day lag in terms of when we're getting those generators shipped, when information needs to be fast and quick if we're in a very fluid emergency
I think I heard
situation.
the Taoiseach saying something that you can't really apply for help until you need help. You can't say, we're a bit worried about this red alert we've set up, therefore we want you to put your generators on standby for us. That's not the way it works in Europe. It's when you have damage, then they'll come to our aid. And we happen to be way off on the west coast of Europe,
but the point
so it's
is
harder for us.
that the damage was done on Saturday and that further details weren't supplied until Monday.
And I'd also say that the ESB are still, up until the middle of this week, we're still identifying areas where damage had been created that they weren't aware of as well. So I think we have to be a bit realistic here as well, that there are parts of the country that there's only repairs we're getting to that they wouldn't have seen the extent of the damage.
But I don't think anyone's criticising the ESB and the work that the people are doing on the ground. It's just the questions deserve to be answered or asked about level of preparedness, and that's in no way to disparage the work that's going.
They do, and no one here is disparaging it, but ultimately that information comes from crews on the grounds. I mean, we're not expecting departments and ministers aren't physically able to collect all that information. They're getting the information from the people who are on the ground, who are doing a
think if someone doesn't have a mobile phone connection, they have no power, and they're supposed to somehow, if they're, say, way off, halfway up a month, they're supposed to tell the ESB how. And the ESB won't necessarily know that there's a single flimsy wire down some boreen. They don't know that until somebody tells them. They cannot scour every inch of the grid in the wake of the storm.
And if I may here as well, Pat, it is easy for someone like me who represents the Dublin constituency to think that's how it should work. But ultimately, we know Dublin is a lot more compact. Yeah. It's a lot more densely populated. The wiring is a lot more evident. In rural Ireland, it's not. We have 165,000 kilometres of distribution network across the country. And we just have to have that perspective as well, that it does take a little bit of time to collect this information.
I think it'll be interesting to see where the conversation goes after this, because we have a lot of people talking about underground cables. And I remember covering extensively back in 2016, I think it was, EirGrid were doing a massive upgrade of the electricity system. And people remember back then there was a huge amount of protests about pylons that were turning up in different neighbourhoods around the country. And at the time, I think there was a lot of conversation about whether we could put all these cables underground. And EirGrid said at the time that it was going to cost about $2 billion to do something like that, and it would add 3% increase on the electricity bills of customers for the next 50 years. And that was sort of the thinking, you know, when you're talking nearly 10 years ago. Will that discussion need to be had now? Are willing, you know, how much of it costs $2 billion back?
But if you've got someone who's, as I say, halfway up a mountain, and you want to put that cable underground, and it's only 2 wires to one farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere, I'm sorry, that's never going to happen. And that set of wires is always going to be vulnerable to high winds, to a tree falling, to a tractor running into a pole. It's always going to be vulnerable to that. But there has to be a reasonable cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that conversation will definitely be looked at, I think, over the coming months and year in terms of whether we're going to have more severe weather events. But I think ultimately a lot of these things cost a lot of money, and that's going to be something
that the Taoiseach said continued investment in the network is a priority for him as well.
Marie?
But I suppose the reality here is that the defence all week has been that this is an unprecedented event. The research has been there for quite a number of years now that are changing weather patterns in this country. I mean, that we are much more vulnerable.
The experts are saying this was not climate related. It was a unique thing called a weather bomb.
No, but
And Mary Robinson herself said that.
But no, but the point, Pat, is right. Okay, that like isn't whatever the genesis of this particular event, that we know that we're going to have adverse events in general in this country, and that there is, you know, every time it happens, whether it's small or large, there's like a scramble there and then. And the reality is that we've known for a number of years now that there are changes taking place, even if it's directly attributable to this particular event or otherwise, and that preparation is there. And what we're really seeing this week is particularly in the health sector, there's been a complete failure to actually factor in that if there is an outage for more than a period of 2 days, that people are left incredibly vulnerable. And I suppose that the reality is we now need to have a task force put in place that looks at every part of Irish society and the economy in terms of when these events take place.
We had a woman who bearded the Taoiseach up in Roscommon, and she was saying she wanted every house to have solar panels and a windmill, and she wanted to go off grid. Now she's changed her mind about going off grid, but I mean, it's that kind of knee-jerk reaction. You're desperately unfortunate when you are in that situation, but the resolution is to sort of equip every house with a windmill.
But I think the point is, though, the solar panels, like this is the lack of ambition that we've had from this government, right? So we have climate targets that have to be met by 2030, right? We've got a massive cost of living challenge with regards to people's home heating bills, and now we're seeing that people are left vulnerable because of connection to electricity lines. And the reality is that there hasn't been a thinking about how we actually put in renewable energy into people's homes, like putting solar panels across thousands of homes in this country. At the moment, people have to seek an individual grant to try and energy upgrade their home. Like, that's a completely inefficient way of upgrading people's homes and making them more climate resilient into the future. So we want to see street by street retrofitting, so that you're actually cutting people's bills, you're cutting your emissions, but you're also making people more resilient.
So yeah, there's two things I'd say here. First of all, I think it's important that we don't take a knee-jerk reaction to this and we kind of sign up. Maybe there are learnings, and I think in fairness, the National Emergency Coordination Group has stood up community response hubs around the country in recordly fast time to provide that immediate humanitarian assistance. We have now humanitarian assistance in place. We have increased the amount of renewable electricity coming onto the grid over the last 5 years of the government. We've also reduced the emissions of it. The Labour Party might like that.
It's a drop in the ocean.
Marie, I didn't interrupt you once, please, with respect. So I think it's important that we actually take these facts as they are coming at the moment. Yes, we need to increase the amount of renewable electricity that comes onto our grid. Yes, we need to increase the availability of batteries, for example, to people as well. But we also need to inform the public of, for example, if someone has an electric vehicle, if they have an appropriate adapter, they could use that to power the appliances in their houses at the moment. We need to make schemes like that available, like the V2L adapter, available for houses that have electricity. If you look at Hannah Daly's article in the Irish Times today, she explains exactly how electric vehicles and batteries can be part of that are already in existence and already supported by government schemes.
We had texts from listeners who were using one was using a Kia 6 to keep the various essential bits of the power going. You switch off everything except the stuff that you want to power, like you want to keep your freezer powered maybe, and you make sure you switch off all the other stuff. But that only lasts for a certain length of time. It won't last 5 days.
It won't, but in an emergency situation, that is an appropriate response. And we are talking about an emergency situation. It was an unprecedented event. And maybe there might be more unprecedented events like this in the future. And we use the learnings from this week
what is
to
the
inform a plan
solution
against
for those hard cases we keep hearing about? You know, the person with the electric wheelchair, the person who needs, some sort of electrically driven nebulizer for a child. What's the solution for those?
Well, I don't believe that there was a coordinated response with regards to the health sector this week that was required.
No, but I mean, where does the effort start? Does it start with the health providers saying, we have a record of everyone who needs oxygen, we have a record of everyone who needs a hoist, an electric hoist, we know where they live, and we're going to try and help them? Is that? I'm really trying to get forensic about this.
Of course, because within every primary care, ideally in terms of our primary care system in this country, right? Okay, there's as in public health nurses dealing day in, day out with people in the community, vulnerable people in the community. So there needs to be a system whereby they can feed into what are the needs of those individuals in the community in terms of their vulnerabilities. And I'm not sure that system works.
I understand a lot of the electricity supply companies, if you're a vulnerable customer, you can register to, if there's ever difficulties with your bills or if there's ever going to be power cuts, those lists are there. You would think that there could be some overarching system in terms of local authorities and the government being able to tap into a list of people that are have already registered that they're reliant, and it's of a super importance to them for those medical devices, for people that aren't badly hit. I think, because I think so many people have been on the radio, and they're just absolutely harrowing stories to be hearing. People
Well,
being
I'm
left
just
for that
wondering
amount of time.
how do you address that? Because there has to be a certain amount of, if you like, community action, that that somebody in number 6B has a problem.
Yeah, and I think most
You know.
people as well, there is a ownership of, like what you're saying about putting your hand up, at personal ownership of flagging that you need assistance in advance, perhaps. But I think if lists are there and there is data available, then it should be tapped into.
Yeah, and then your public health nurse is stranded at home with no electricity or whatever.
Yeah, it's not gone.
It's going to be a difficult problem to solve universally.